Good evening, everyone, and we're here live from the Royal Observatory Greenwich on top of the hill in Greenwich Park. Just want to first of all introduce ourselves. My name is Brendan Owens. I'm an astronomer here at the Royal Observatory Greenwich, and I'm joined this evening by Imad Ahmed,
Hi,
my
guys.
good friend. And Imad is from the new Crescent Society, and also behind us you might see our other astronomer here, Tom Kerss.
Hello.
So we're three of us here, and our social media team, web team, are here to bring you, hopefully, a sighting of the new crescent moon, a very special crescent moon to mark the start of Ramadan. And for all of you who are tuning in over Facebook, please make sure to leave comments in a moment. Imad's going to ask me a few questions, and you can quiz us on anything about the moon, about astronomy in general. That's what we're here for. And most importantly as well, Tom is behind us working away at a telescope. And what we have is a telescope view for you at the moment just of our westerly horizon as we're waiting for the sun to set in the west and to hopefully catch a glimpse. We do have some cloud cover, so Tom is going to keep an eye on that. He may let a shout out of him to let us know if he can see something through there.
Yes, I'll try
So,
not to
very
lose
exciting.
lose my cool.
Excellent, that's brilliant. So I think, Imad, you have a few interesting questions to ask me.
Yeah, just I guess to start us off, I know a lot of people will be trying to sight the crescent moon. So maybe just to begin, if they're looking out into the sky, where should they be looking?
That's a very good starting point, actually. If you were to have a look for the new crescent moon, you're looking off to the westerly horizon, and the sun is setting a little bit further along to the north, so we'd say the west-northwest. Now, to find this out, you could do something very old school, like get a compass and just check what your direction is. A lot of smartphones nowadays come with their own compass as well, and you can use that. But if you're seeing the sun set, don't look directly at the sun, very, very bright object. But if you're looking a little bit to the left of that, then we're looking out for the new crescent moon.
So the sun's gonna set, and we're looking slightly to the left of the sun.
That's right.
Okay, and then for those who are looking for the moon, roughly how high should they be? Is it really high in the sky? Is it quite low?
It's quite low, and that's
Okay.
a very important point as well. We're looking off to the west, and preferably you want a nice clear view to your westerly horizon. Here in London we do have a lot of features. You may have seen that we have the Shard and other tall buildings in the way, but we are on top of a hill. And yes, we're looking low down. So
Right, okay.
if we're to try to say how low, sometimes we use a measure using our hands. So we put out our hand outstretched, our arm,
Okay,
and our
outstretched arm.
fist. Yes, so
Right,
that's
okay.
it. Yeah, and our fist is if the horizon, when you're looking off into the distance, is just at the bottom of your fist. That's 10 degrees from
Right.
bottom of fist to top with your thumb tucked in.
Right.
So the moon should be at sunset 9 degrees above the horizon, so almost a
One-
fist's height.
About one fist.
Yeah, about
So
one
you-
fist high.
Gonna look where the sun was setting, not looking directly at the
That's
sun,
right.
of course.
Yeah, a little bit to the left.
and then about one fist above the horizon.
That's it.
Okay, wow.
So
And
tricky, you know, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
It is a challenge.
yeah, it was always challenging to see the new crescent. I've been looking for the new crescent every month for the last year or so. I have to say, with the cloudy conditions in the UK, it is very challenging, and those of us
Absolutely.
saw the cloud cover this morning might have been a bit worried, but
Welcome to the life of a British astronomer.
That's it.
That's what
we
it's
do.
like.
We do. It's almost 50-50 looking out at the
Okay.
sky. So a lot of patience required.
yeah.
And it's great. That, you have a lot of dedication. Or there are other people out there who are dedicated to moon sighting, and something we want to inspire more people to do, to sort of connect to the sky
Absolutely.
and have a look for themselves.
What I might say is, if you're watching at home on the Facebook Live, if you've got any questions, put them in the comments, and they should appear here, and we'll be able to ask those questions directly. If you see the moon, if you take any pictures, definitely tweet them to the Royal Observatory Greenwich.
Yeah, absolutely. Our Twitter handle is ROG Astronomers. So at ROG Astronomers, or of course if you're on the Facebook Live feed looking at it right now, just pop comments in, post pictures. We also have an astrophotography group on our
Wow,
Facebook
okay.
as well, so that's well worth posting.
If you don't mind me asking, Brendan, I'm just going to ask about where we are right now.
Yeah, yeah.
Where
of
are
course.
we?
So we're at the home of time and space.
Wow. Okay.
Which always sounds very grand.
Uh-huh.
I think it's a very fitting place to have a viewing
Of
like
course,
this.
yeah.
And we are on top of a hill It is the oldest scientific institution in Britain, so founded in 1675, and sighting the moon and looking at the stars was core to why the observatory was set up in the first place, for navigation purposes. So around us here we have telescopes that are Tom size, nice and portable, but we also have an 18-ton telescope,
Wow.
absolutely huge. We have famous timekeepers as well that kept time on sea voyages to help find your location east or west. But definitely moon sighting, observing the moon over a long time, has helped us actually come up with the facts that we're using today to actually figure out where we need to look on the horizon.
Wow, okay. And of course we're in Greenwich, which is famous for its meridian line.
Absolutely.
It's famous for Greenwich Mean Time. So it's quite a symbolic location as well to be conducting this moon sighting. I think maybe it's the first live stream of a Ramadan crescent from Greenwich.
This is a first for us. I don't think this has ever happened in the history of the Royal Observatory Greenwich.
So it's a historic event for everybody
Absolutely.
watching, but especially Muslims who are going to be fasting tomorrow. Maybe fasting tomorrow depending if we see the moon.
That's it. We're keeping an eye open, and as you said earlier, it was cloudy, but it is starting to clear. You can already tell, maybe perhaps, that it's getting a little darker, a little dimmer. That will always help, because the contrast of a bright crescent moon next to a dark, deep blue sky should pop out. So we may be hampered by clouds here, but people in other parts of the country may have better luck.
And I know there are groups actually around the country that I've been communicating with who are out in different places, on hills in different parts of the country. So if you guys are watching, please let us know how things are going, if you've seen the moon, and hopefully somebody will see it somewhere in the UK. What's the possibility like of seeing the moon today?
Well, it is particularly an easier sighting of a crescent moon. If you look at the types of crescent moons you can have, the thickness of the crescent moon should be substantial enough for anyone to see. So really what we're talking about here is weather conditions. So rather than having a tricky crescent moon that's too thin to see, this is about the cloud cover. Definitely a good one to have. And also between sunset and moonset, we're talking about over an hour.
Okay,
so 69 minutes.
I'm just going to stop you there. Sunset, I think I know what that is.
Yeah.
Moonset, what is moonset?
Yeah, we don't usually talk about that.
No.
You know, you don't go to bed at moonset or get up and stretch your arms at moonrise. But we say rising and setting for not just the sun. We can say them for stars, for planets, and the moon as well. So that is moonrise is when the moon is appearing above the horizon, off in the distance towards the east, and moonset is when the moon is dipping below the horizon.
Okay.
And one of the other things I should mention as well is that when the moon is low to the horizon, quite close to the ground from our view, it looks enormous. So it's also a fantastic photo opportunity. It's a trick of the mind. If you still want to check that the moon hasn't grown in size, you can hold out your little finger at arm's length and cover the moon.
Wow, okay. So in terms of the moon tonight, we should be able to see it depending on the weather, but it's there somewhere.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're looking at what we say is 7 degrees elongation. Sounds very complicated.
What does that mean, Brendan?
That's a good question. That's definitely the one I was expecting. It's the separation between the centre of the sun and the centre of the moon.
Right.
So we're looking at a degrees separation. So we could use again, it's a little bit rough this way around, but we could again use our fist, except this time instead of upright, we could have it at an angle instead.
Okay.
So if this is 10 degrees, it's a little less than the width of a fist away. And it's important to say as well, both the moon and sun, if you were to trace out their path across the sky, it's a curve. And at the moment, it's quite a steep curve. So you'll have the moon up above the sun, so sort of to the top left, and then the sun is setting.
Right. What, as people are looking, obviously it's quite bright now, so they probably won't see the moon now. When would be a good time to catch the moon?
So there's a lot of sort of different calculations that a lot of astronomers have looked at over the years of a best time. I think it's a lot to get into here, but tonight the Nautical Almanac Office have said that 18 minutes past 9 o'clock would be an ideal time to go looking. Now that's not too far away from Moonset, which is later on in the evening, but they've said that that will be the best time. But really, I think there's a certain joy and excitement in just getting ready and just remaining out even when it's this light and waiting for the sun to set.
Well, I think if it's alright, I might share my experience of what you've just said.
Please.
In going out to view the moon every month, it's the hardest moon to see of the year, not just because of the weather conditions, but the moon is really thin. So seeing the new moon and being able to know that it's the new month in the Islamic calendar is an enormously gratifying experience. And especially for this month, I feel really privileged to be here actually with everybody. And I really do hope I get to see the moon. I might just share, I've never seen the crescent moon for Ramadan.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
In my life. Because, you know, I've got into this in my adult life.
Yes.
And last year I looked for it and I couldn't see it. So I'm really, really hoping that we're going to catch it today. And I'm so excited. So thanks so much for this opportunity. We've had some questions actually.
Oh, great.
So I'm going to ask some of them. Hannah asks, where in London can you get the best view?
That's a good point. Now, you know, we're a little bit extra lucky, I guess, that we're on top of a hill, but we're not the only hill in London. There are other high locations and high buildings. So first of all, getting up to a height will always help you. But you're looking off towards the westerly horizon, looking for, if you can't get a flat westerly horizon, which would be somewhere on the coast, at least if you have plenty of gaps between the buildings and trees. Because of this hour-long time between sunset and moonset, the moon will be moving across the sky. So even if you think, oh no, I've got a tall building in the way or a tall tree, you might just see it pop out from behind those objects.
And that's happened to me actually as well. And sometimes there's been a bit of cloud. I've just looked at the cloud and you just see it popping out of the cloud, shimmering. So if there's a bit of cloud where you are, don't panic, be patient, and hopefully you'll see the moon today. We've got a question about the equipment being used today. Can we describe what equipment we've got?
Well, I think it's probably best to hand that over if Tom's got time.
I'll do my best, yeah. We're just using a very small compact telescope here. This is actually no different in its design from a large camera lens. If you've ever used a big telephoto lens for sport photography or wildlife photography, this is quite similar, but the way it's designed is for looking at the night sky. And what we're doing here, we're doing something quite creative and something that's actually very easy for most people to do themselves, which is to simply put a smartphone, into the eyepiece of the telescope and to use the smartphone camera to retrieve a live feed. And so here is the feed that's coming in right now. And as I pan the telescope around, just going down towards the horizon, I can show you the building line here. So we're looking at some of the buildings in London. Here is the famous Shard, and behind it you can see the telecom tower. And one of the curious things you may notice if you've got a good view here of the telecom tower is that the words or letters BT are actually backwards. And that's because our telescope is flipping the image. If we're lucky enough to see the moon, which hopefully we will be, then we would expect it to actually appear the wrong way round through the telescope. Of course, the way we see it with our eyes will always be correct, but we'd expect it to appear back to front through the telescope, so east and west have been flipped around with the orientation we have here. But you could actually try taking a picture if you had your own telescope and you could see the crescent moon by holding your phone up to the eyepiece. If you've got a really steady hand, you could take a picture. I don't have very steady hands, so luckily I've got this device here to clamp the phone on for me.
That's great. If you've actually got, thanks Tom, if you've got any burst mode on your phone where it takes lots of pictures in one go, that can sometimes help when you're trying to steady your hand over an eyepiece.
Wonderful. And again, if you've got any questions or if you're out and about, if you've got any comments, please put them into the comments section. We receive them here on the iPad and I'll be able to ask our astronomer here. On that note though, on technology, some other people have asked about different apps that you might use or you might recommend to follow the moon cycle or to know where the moon is and how to sight the moon that might support that.
That's a really good question, and it's something, honestly, we astronomers at the Royal Observatory Greenwich, we do use apps, we do use smartphones, we're not going through big books of tables and calculations. You know, there are some fantastic things that have come out of all those past calculations that have made it possible to have easy access. So I would always recommend not spending money, if possible, on apps. There are so many free applications out there. One piece of software that can work on a computer that can give you a lot of insight is called Stellarium.
Okay, how do you spell that?
That is a tricky one. That's Stellarium. IUM.
Okay, stellar.
Stellar
Ium.
Ium.
Okay.
That's exactly it. And that allows you to set your exact location
Uh-huh.
anywhere and to view the sky, to search for objects, whatever you want to have a look at, and see where things are in the sky. And you can go back through time and you can go
Wow.
forward through time. So it's like a
Okay.
mini version of our planetarium that we have
Phenomenal.
here. And also, in terms of smartphone applications, there are some out there like Sky Safari, Star Walk, and others that are really useful. And they're across various type devices, Android, iOS, all of those.
I'm looking at the time now. It's 8:50, which is
Okay,
3 minutes after sunset. It's still quite bright though. So in my mind, I've always thought sunset is going to be quite dark at sunset. Is this normal? What's happening?
No, this is absolutely normal. We have our sunset and then we move into periods of time called twilight.
Right. Okay.
And often I think it's maybe our perception of time. You know, if you're having, you know, if you're talking with someone, you're not realizing the passage of time. You might think, oh, the sun has just set. But if you take the time to carefully study it, it goes from sunset, the sun going below the horizon, then twilight comes. First of all, we call it civil twilight,
Civil.
which is where usually street lights come on. People switch on their headlights on their cars. Then we have nautical twilight, and that's for when the first bright navigation stars come out in the sky, or brightest stars in the sky. And then we finally have usually astronomical twilight,
Wow.
which is when it's totally dark and we have as many stars as your eyes will let you see. But we are in the northern hemisphere. We're at a latitude of about 51.5 degrees north of the equator, and at this time of the year for us we have perpetual twilight.
Perpetual twilight.
So another
Okay.
sort of
Uh-huh.
fancy jargon term,
Right.
but it's one that basically means it never gets truly dark during our summer months. So typically we astronomers, we wait till the winter months to get our truly dark skies.
Right.
So if you're out in the deepest, darkest countryside and you've waited till midnight or 1 a.m., then you still will see this faint glow in the sky. It might even appear to you as if it's like light pollution, like street
Right.
lights.
Okay.
But that's actually because the sun is not far enough below the horizon.
It's very interesting you mentioned that, Brendan, because this notion of perpetual twilight is actually something relevant for Muslims, because they calculate the night prayer as coming after twilight, when it's dark. But in the summer months, when we have perpetual twilight, so the sky doesn't quite get dark, we have a bit of a debate. Oh, when do we pray? Do we, you know, so there's lots of different people with different opinions. On that note, it's actually time for me to pray. So if it's all right for you, Brendan, I'm going to leave you for around just a couple of minutes.
That's absolutely fine.
We still have some questions here,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you've got a lot of information to give us. Thank you so much. I'll
Thanks
be
very
back.
much, Imad. We'll see you again soon. Just to let everybody know as well, you might pick up that there is this strange voice emanating from Greenwich Park, and actually the park closes around sunset. So we're effectively getting locked in, but don't worry, we won't be having to pitch up tents and stay here for the entire night. But for anybody, maybe, just in the off chance, anybody who is in Greenwich Park, perhaps following this live stream, do watch out, because in a few minutes' time those park gates will be closed. So I hope you're all enjoying the feed right now, but I thought I might just have a look at some other questions that we've been receiving. And there's some really nice stuff as well. So some people are asking perhaps if they could use a hobby telescope at home, so maybe something quite small. You don't need a super powerful telescope to be able to view the crescent moon. In fact, we'd actually recommend against that. If you're trying to sight the whole crescent moon, you don't want something big and beefy. A smaller telescope is definitely something to use. There are different types of telescopes. Usually the thin and long ones are called refractors. They're lensed telescopes, and they allow you to see a nice wide view of the sky. And right now Tom has the phone clamped onto his telescope, and it's on a little piece called an eyepiece, and you can take out eyepieces and put different ones in to increase your magnification, so you can get a more zoomed up view. So if you are interested, you can look at features on the moon as well as seeing a beautiful curve of the crescent moon. And just to emphasise again, if we do get to see the crescent moon through the telescope, rather than a backward C, which is what you would see with your eye, you're going to see a C instead. So
That's
many
right.
C's in my sentence
Yeah,
there. But
most telescopes will flip the image in some way, and a refractor with its mirror at the back will give you an upright image. So north and south is correct, but east and west are flipped around typically, especially when you're looking at something on the horizon. And it's certainly worth mentioning as well, if you are going to use your own telescope to sight the new crescent moon, just take absolute care, because by definition the new crescent moon is always really close, apparently close to the sun in the sky, and the last thing you want to do is point an unfiltered telescope at the sun with your eye to the eyepiece. So please take absolutely maximum care when looking for the new crescent moon. The best advice I can give you is just to make sure the sun is actually below the horizon, because then there's no risk that you're going to accidentally point a telescope at the sun, which will very typically result in permanent eye damage. So please do be careful if you're going to use a telescope for this task.
I thought it might be worth adding as well, someone else has asked on our Facebook stream, how long will the crescent be visible for? And I guess we've got between now and Moonset, which I'd mentioned earlier on. For anybody who's just tuning in now, that's when the moon is setting and coming down and eventually going below the horizon. And that is due to take place at 21:56, so basically exactly an hour from now. So in exactly an hour from now, the moon will have set. In the run-up to moonset, the moon is getting lower and lower in the sky. So eventually there may be a point when it's 3 degrees above the horizon, 2 degrees, maybe only a finger at arm's length or 2 fingers, that it may be obscured by trees or buildings in your location. So definitely, perhaps now or after praying, it's definitely the time to have a look for that crescent moon in the sky. And Tom, how are you doing?
Now the sky's looking, it's getting really nice and clear out to the west. We still have quite a few banks of cloud, unfortunately. The crescent moon is so faint that we need to wait for the sky to really get quite dark before we get sufficient contrast for that crescent to actually pop out against the background sky. And so at the moment I think the contrast of the moon is probably lower than the brilliance of the beautifully illuminated pink-orange sunset clouds that we can see stretched over the city and indeed Westminster beyond over there. But I think in a few moments, if the sky continues to darken, we should eventually be able to get some sort of sighting with the unaided eye. My task is then going to be to try and get the telescope pointed at that as quickly and efficiently and panic-free as possible, at which point we hopefully will be able to bring you a live feed as well.
Fantastic, thanks Tom.
I'll keep on it. I'll keep on the task.
No, it really does require a lot of patience and a lot of concentration, and especially if we're aiming in the reasonably right part of the sky, you do have to keep hunting around the sky to see the crescent moon. And some people in other parts of the UK, welcome back, Imad.
Thank you so much.
And other people in the UK may have better, clearer skies, so please do let us know if you're getting a sight of the new crescent moon from your location. So I might just hand back the iPad just to say we've answered a few questions.
Great.
Just had a look at people who are using telescopes and saying that you don't need a very powerful telescope to view the new crescent moon, and also how long the crescent moon will be visible for. So I've just let everybody know when the moon is setting. So we've got basically just short of an hour
we'll have some time
to sight the new crescent moon.
And just to reiterate, what time do you think it'll be the clearest in the sky?
So weather depending, 21:18, so 18 minutes past 9 is when it's predicted to have the best balance of still being high enough up on the horizon, but the sky being dark enough to really see the new crescent moon. And I must mention as well that we can't take the credit for all of these calculations.
Right.
Just a little bit about the history of the observatory. Back in the 18th century and on into the 19th century and onwards, the Astronomers Royal here set up something called the Nautical Almanac, which was a list of lots of different astronomical events that was published. Nowadays, today, we're a centre, science communication centre and a museum, and that element of data gathering and publishing the Nautical Almanac has moved down to Taunton, to Somerset, to the Hydrographic Office. But you can still go online today to Her Majesty's Nautical Almanac Office and find all of this data. So that's where we're taking our data from this evening.
All right. And based on that data, I think you just said it, but just to clarify it, how did you come to know that at 18 minutes past 9, it will be the clearest in the sky? The moon, the new crescent moon, will be easiest to see.
So that's a little tricky for me to
Right.
get into right now because
Okay.
there's a number of different methods that were used. So there are papers that are still on the Nautical Almanac
Right,
Office
okay.
website, but it is that balance of how dark the sky is and how far above the horizon the moon is, and the separation between the moon and the sun. If the moon is too close to the sun, it'll be in a new moon phase,
Yeah.
and also be lost in the glare of our local star, the sun.
Okay. So in about a quarter of an hour, it should be as clear as it can be.
Yeah, best
Alright.
time, but still opportunities before and after.
A few people have asked a question, which is, I thought we announced that Ramadan was yesterday.
Yes.
So I might perhaps intervene and answer this question. Different countries have different methods of working out their lunar months. Some of them use data, calculated data, and they base it on the astronomical new moon rather than the sighting of the new crescent, which is a term I might ask you to clarify, the astronomical new moon. And so Turkey and Saudi Arabia, they actually conducted a moon sighting yesterday. Actually, Turkey didn't conduct a moon sighting because they just used data. So people in Turkey are fasting today, actually.
Right.
Whereas
okay.
people in the UK, Saudi Arabia, most of Africa, and most of Asia are not fasting today. So Turkey have used a different method. Saudi Arabia used a different method. So for them, the month of Sha'ban, which is the current month we're in, it was the 29th of the month yesterday. But for other countries, like Morocco, which is our closest Muslim country, the 29th is today. So for some people, or many people, today is the appropriate day to look for the new moon. Whether you think, whether you follow Saudi or Turkey or the UK or Morocco, or whoever you decide to follow, today still is the first day that we should be able to see the new moon and the new crescent. So I hope that clarifies that question a bit. Today's the first day you'll see the new crescent. For some countries today is the 29th, and for some countries today is the 30th. So there's where the difference of opinion lies.
Thanks for saying that, Imad. Thank you.
Okay. We have a question from a student, well, I assume it's a student. I'm a teacher, so Humayun, age 9. Can you calculate an exact date for Eid every year?
Aha. Okay, so maybe if I clarify this again, like the Eid will be marked by the sighting of
The new moon
next
again, yep.
new crescent
New
moon.
crescent.
So every time for these calculations, there you have to put in your location where we are. So in this case, for this new sighting, this new crescent moon sighting, for all locations, there was no chance of seeing the moon yesterday
okay.
because the moon had already set before the sun had set. So I haven't looked in a while for next month's, but there may be an occasion where some parts of the world may see the new crescent moon while others can't. So I'm going to be going back to that data again to check it out and see if it is possible. But it's very important to consider your latitude, so how far north or south you are, and east and west as well. But we have been taking data over the centuries to be able to predict these, so they're very accurate apart from the width of the crescent moon in the sky. So if the moon is up in the sky but it's quite close to the sun but maybe just about far enough away to make out a crescent, that can then depend on your eyesight, your ability to see a contrast of blue sky and a thin white crescent as well. And in astronomy, again, over the years, over the decades and over the centuries, people have tried to work out what we think the minimum size of crescent, the smallest, thinnest crescent that can be perceived or seen by the human eye. So the last sort of look at this was, I think it was in the 70s and 80s.
Right.
And there's a term called the Danjon limit, after a scientist, Danjon, French scientist, who took repeated observations of crescent moons to try and figure out how close the center of the moon and the center of the sun could be, how close to one another they could be, and still be able to see a crescent moon and not a new moon. And he found out that that separation is about 7 degrees from the center of the sun to center of the moon. in a slightly stranger as well, as seen from the centre of the Earth.
Okay.
So it gets very mathematical rather than standing on the ground looking up. So that's what he worked out.
On that note, then, I did ask you before about an astronomical new moon. So I know that there are some countries or some people who work out lunar calendars based on calculations of the astronomical new moon. What does that mean?
So a new moon, actually, maybe it's worth mentioning phases of the moon in general,
great,
just as a good jumping off point. So we go through the phases of the moon. Take, for instance, from now, the waxing crescent moon, as we call it, or new crescent moon, through to a first quarter moon, through to something we call a waxing gibbous moon, which looks a bit like your thumbnail. So not quite full, but not half of the moon, of the circle of the moon. And then finally full moon, and then it starts to go in the reverse order until you get to a waning crescent moon, where it's a thin crescent, eventually to a new moon. And an astronomical new moon is when all of the sun's light is shining on the other side of the moon. To really break it down, the moon, like the Earth and other planets, is spherical. It's a sphere, it's a ball. Not perfectly smooth, but pretty much a ball. And if you light up a ball with a torch, one half will be light and one half will be dark. So as the moon moves around the Earth, and as the Earth and the moon are moving around the sun, the moon gets to a point where we're looking at effectively the nighttime side of the moon, and the rest of the light is on the other side. So there is a very small moment in time where the moon is dark on our side and completely lit on the opposite side.
Okay.
So if you were to travel around in a spacecraft, you'd have to go right round the other side of the moon to see the fully lit side.
Okay. So I guess to answer Humayun's question, could we calculate the exact date for Eid? It will depend, I guess, on what method you're using to calculate Eid. If you are using something like Turkey, I think they know it for the next 100 years. But if you are, like me, personally, going out looking for the new crescent, there's always a bit of ambiguity, and it's always a bit of fun for me, actually. It's quite magical going out looking for the moon. Some months you see it, some months you don't. But I think that's what makes it special for me. So lots of people are doing it in different ways.
That's great.
We've got shout out to the people moonsighting in, I think it's Bury, but you spell it B-U-R, so...
Oh, very good.
Wherever you're doing your moonsighting,
Excellent.
shout out. I know there's a group in High Wycombe, there's a group in Pollard's Hill.
Great.
They did say they'll be tuning in, so if you're there, please leave a comment, let us know how things are going.
If there's any sightings so far.
There's another group I know in Bolton, another group in Batley. They've all been contacting the new Crescent Society, so we're really, really looking forward to news if they've seen the new Crescent. Have you got any news for us, Tom?
We've got a little bit of news. Unfortunately, the new crescent hasn't quite made its appearance. The sky is rapidly beginning to darken. The contrast is improving. In the meantime, if you are out looking and your horizon is a little bit cloudy, well, if you take a little look above the western horizon, quite far above the western horizon, you might notice a bright star, which sometimes goes by the name the Evening Star. But actually, this isn't a star at all. This is the planet Venus, and we're sighting it through the telescope at the moment. So those of you watching the live stream can now see a little bright star. That is actually a planet well over 100 million miles away from us right now on the far side of the sun. And that's actually the nearest, technically speaking, planet to the Earth if we were to line them all up. So we're always doing some sort of astronomy here, even if we can't quite find the object we're looking for, we'll always find something else. But in the meantime, we'll just keep an eye on the horizon. It is beginning to darken. I've managed to calculate the approximate position of the crescent moon, which is very close to the horizon. If we are going to get a nice clear horizon, I think we're in for quite a dramatic view because we've got the buildings there, but it's just a case of whether or not that cloud is too thick. Unfortunately, as with any aspect of looking through the atmosphere, the lower you look on the horizon, the more stuff you're looking through. Now that includes air, but it can also include cloud, and so there is a possibility that the moon's faintness won't be able to push through those banks of cloud. This is one of the great challenges in sighting such a thin crescent.
Absolutely.
I guess in the Muslim world, the tradition is you go looking for the moon on the 29th of the month. And the Prophet Muhammad said, if it's cloudy or if the moon is obscured, you should calculate. And what calculate means different things to people. It could be taking a sighting from somewhere else, complete the 30 days. So people are really expert in this. They're connected to different networks and doing different things. quite relevant in London, where it's often quite cloudy.
Absolutely. It's very interesting to think as well that the moon itself, it doesn't lend itself very well to a whole number of days. If we were to calculate how long it takes the moon to go from a new crescent moon phase to another one, or maybe easier to think about going from a full moon back to a full moon again, is 29 and a half days.
29 and a half days.
So just really when we're trying to live our lives and do everything, it's quite difficult to run by half days. So this creates, or it lends itself to creating these calendars to make that possible, to make
and so just so you know, and I'm sure you know, but for our viewers, in a lunar calendar in the Islamic world, it's only ever 29 or 30 days. You can't have 28 days like February, you can't have 31 days like January, only 29 or 30.
It's incredibly close. It's the closest calendar. It is a lunar calendar. Really is fixed to that true cycle.
Now, if you'll allow me to jump in, we're going to switch scenes here because we have actually got our sighting of the new crescent moon. Imad, if you'd like to see something you haven't seen before, here it is. And as you can see, it's an extremely thin crescent. As I mentioned before, this is appearing back to front as you would see it in the sky. That's just the curiosity in the optics of the telescope. Nothing to do with the universe going nuts or anything. It's just the way the telescope is flipping the image. And the moon is only about 2.5% illuminated from our perspective. So it's what we would call a phase of 0.002, 0.02. So very, very, very narrow, which is why it appears so incredibly thin. We're seeing just the very thinnest slice of the day side of the moon. And the night side of the moon is completely invisible in our image here, because of course the moon with no atmosphere, its night side is as dark as space itself. And so, of course, it's far darker than the sky as we see it from Earth. So, from our perspective, the night side of the moon just seems to take on the colour of the sky, which gives us this illusion that the moon really is just a thin slice, but in fact it is a sphere, and we're just peering round to the day side of it now. So I'm going to continue to track this. If you want to take any more questions, if you managed to see this in the feed and you've seen it yourself, then please drop us a comment.
Please,
give us a thumbs up if you are enjoying this view.
Yes, please do. Let us know what you think as well, because this is our inaugural live stream from the Royal Observatory.
I feel so honoured to have been able to see the Ramadan moon. I didn't see it with my own two eyes. I've seen it through the telescope, but I was just wondering, can you see it on the horizon with your eyes, or do we need the telescope to see it?
Now, my impression is that it's not quite visible at the current time, so we can use the telescope as a guide here. We know exactly where the moon is, and actually, yes, it is just visible in between the two banks of cloud there. So between the shard and this tower block, if you come between the two and then come up from the horizon about one fist, you will see just the faintest slender line of light curving like this in the sky. The cloud is just about to drift in front of it. So if you're following this cloud bank drifting here, you may just catch it just beneath the cloud now.
Oh, I can see it! Oh,
there it is.
I saw it. I can see it. It's very, very clear. And it's just
very clear. Yeah,
just being covered
it's
by
easy
the cloud.
to lose when you look away, but when you come back,
you know,
if you keep your eye on that cloud bank, yeah, there it is. And over the next, we've got probably 45 minutes or so before Moonset. Over this time, the moon is going to continue to get more and more pronounced on the horizon, and it's gently going to drift down over the shard from our perspective here, up on the hill in Greenwich Park at the Royal Observatory.
So much. I can see it with my own two eyes, and
that is brilliant.
In our tradition, we have a prayer that we say when we see the moon arriving on the horizon like this. So if you don't mind, I'll just say it in Arabic. It's Allahumma ahillahu alayna bil yumna wal iman wa salamati wal islam rabbi wa rabbuk Allah, which means may this new moon bring good luck, auspiciousness, peace. Salama means like well-being, Islam, and then you turn to the moon and say, my God and your God is Allah. So it's obviously from the Islamic tradition, but whatever tradition you're from, I'm really moved to have. I can't see it anymore, but I saw it for.
Still there. Yeah. And you know, the moon has brought us apparently some good luck, because we've got very lucky with the weather.
Yes. Wonderful.
When Brendan and I turned up at the Royal Observatory this morning, we really worried about this evening's weather, but fortunately we're doing pretty well here. As you can see, we've got some dramatic clouds drifting in front of our crescent moon here, just adding a little bit of dynamic contrast. Actually, of course, the moon has no clouds at all, so weather is something you wouldn't notice if you were on the moon, looking back at the Earth. And the moon itself is not a particularly pleasant place to be. Only a handful of people have been there. Daytime temperatures on the moon can reach about 100 degrees centigrade. Nighttime temperatures on the moon reach about minus 150 degrees centigrade. So it's either very hot or very cold, basically, depending on whether it's day or night.
I'd say it's very exciting right now because this is the time where, as the minutes tick by, this is going to become, clouds forgiving, it's going to become clearer, so the contrast will improve. So definitely now, if you're just getting started, just trying to get yourself orientated, you've come to us at a very good time, as we're getting darker skies, and that contrast improves between a sunlit sky, sunlit moon, should I say, and the slightly dimming sky. And in fact, the moon, just to say as well, you might see the moon is a fantastic light to have a look at. It's when you see a full moon in the sky, or even when you get a very clear crescent moon, it looks incredibly bright. But just to say, that is only a fraction of the sun's light that is coming back to us. The moon is what I'd like to say is a very poor mirror, like having a really dusty mirror. It's rock, and if you took those rocks up off the ground, they're very dark. They're not very bright. So about 8% or less of the sun's light that is bouncing back to us here on Earth.
From the rocks?
From those rocks.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think it might be a good time to mention that Tom is writing a book actually about
Yes. So we previously at the Royal Observatory we published a book called Stargazing, A Beginner's Guide to Astronomy, and I'm very pleased to say that later this year we'll have a book called Moon Gazing. So if this inspires you to do your own moon watching, we're going to produce what we hope is the ultimate beginner's guide to going and looking at the moon, whether it's studying the moon as we are, pretty much with our eyes, which of course is the great tradition throughout the history of human civilization, or if you have your own telescope or a pair of binoculars, the sorts of things that you can go and find, and hopefully to help us all understand a little better the cycles of the moon, which don't actually, as we know, as it causes trouble, don't actually marry up with our calendars. We tend to round everything in our lives into days, but of course the moon's orbit is not a whole number of days, and very few things actually are. So it just reminds us that our calendars have to be constantly adjusted to keep up with these cycles. So that book will be available later this year, and we're also celebrating, I should drop in as well, the fact that this year, of course, is also the 50th anniversary of the very first human mission to the moon, which was Apollo 8, launching in December of 1968, in which 3 astronauts travelled around the moon and came back to Earth. It was around the Christmas period, a very nice time to be sort of up there on travelling around another world. And that was, of course, a test, ultimately, for what would be Apollo 11 the following year, which would be the first time that human beings would step foot on the moon. So it's quite amazing. It's been 50 years, and no one's been back since 1972. What's the deal with that?
Last foot taken off there. We still have spacecraft that are orbiting the moon. We're taking photographs of the moon up close, and one of them, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, can take pictures and actually see the tracks that the rovers made. The astronauts drove
all the
around.
equipment that was left behind, all that junk they didn't clean up,
Wow.
just left there on
a
the
little
moon.
bit of litter. They'll have to fix that in the future.
So I guess I could say with some confidence that tomorrow is Ramadan. We've sighted the moon, so the new lunar month has begun. So Ramadan Mubarak, or Ramadan Kareem, or Happy Ramadan to all those who are celebrating. We've had actually quite an interesting question, which I'm going to ask. People are now, I think, we've seen the moon, they're looking for the moon. We've got a question. If we're using Venus, where do we look?
Well, that's a good point.
Yes.
Actually. So,
All right.
You've been
Yeah, the moon is
studying
very low on the horizon, of course, which means its contrast is low. But Venus is actually hard to miss if your sky is clear, because right now it really is the only thing that looks like a star in the sky, because we're still experiencing the civil twilight and the sky is very blue from our perspective. If you look out to the west, basically in the same direction as you're trying to sight the moon, but you look higher above the horizon, actually the height above the horizon we can calculate is approximately 30 degrees. So if you put your fist on the horizon sideways and then put it on top of itself, and again, that measures about 30 degrees above the horizon, then you'll see that incredibly brilliant star. Venus takes on either the moniker of the evening star or the morning star, in much the same way as the moon can be a thin crescent on either side of the sun in the morning sky, or as we're seeing it now in the evening sky. Likewise, Venus, which always appears to be quite close to the sun because it's an inferior planet, which is to say nothing of its quality, it just means it's inside of the Earth's orbit. So it always appears relatively close to the sun. If it's following the sun after sunset, it's the evening star, and if it's leading the sun before sunrise, it's the morning star. But of course, it's not a star, it's a whole world. And much like the moon, not really a very nice place to go, but we'll stick with the moon tonight rather than getting into all of the conditions on Venus.
That's
So,
fantastic. Thank you.
Could we use Venus to help somebody know which way to look for the moon?
Like a pointer?
Yes,
Yeah.
no, that is a very good idea. At the present time, the way to look for the moon, if you're in the northern hemisphere at least, then if you're looking at Venus up there in the sky, if you come directly down from Venus to the horizon, then the moon is actually not far away from that line between Venus and the horizon. From our perspective, it's a little bit to the right of that line. So what you really need to do is you need to come down to the horizon until you're just barely a few fingers width above the horizon, which is only about 4 or 5 degrees, and slightly to the right of that line. So if, for example, you are using your eyes, that's going to be a little challenging because measuring exactly how far to the right to come is going to be quite hard. But what I would do is just take a line straight from Venus down to the horizon, look gently towards the right. If you have something like a telescope or a pair of binoculars, just gently sweep across that that region of the sky, and eventually you're going to find it. But it isn't actually far off that line, so Venus might help you if you're out there right now looking yourself.
I mean, I can see the crescent now
Mhm.
with my eyes, and I'm looking at Venus. I go down, it's a bit to the right.
A bit to the right. And the crescent is going to just become ever more dramatic now that the sky will really quicken in how it darkens. Because now that the sun is getting quite well below the horizon, you'll see, if you can see clouds in your sky, the clouds are dark. When the clouds are dark, it means very little sunlight is now bouncing off the clouds around the curvature of the Earth, and so the sun is going to the sky darkness is going to quite rapidly darken, which means the contrast of the moon will improve. Now, of course, there's this funny complexity to it. As the moon gets lower in the sky, it does necessarily get sort of harder to see, but as the sky gets darker, the moon gets easier to see. And at some point, these two graphs cross over, which I think is at about 18 minutes past 9 this evening, which we've just gone past.
Yes.
So probably things will get slightly more challenging, but even though the moon will get lower, it will certainly appear brighter as the sky gets darker. So just keep your eyes on it. If you're in the right sort of place looking below Venus, then just keep your eyes on it because the moon hasn't set yet. You've got a good half an hour or so before the moon itself is going to be below the horizon.
Thank you so much, Tom. I think if you've got any final questions, this would be a great time to send them in.
Yeah, please do. And they can be, entirely astronomically related. It could be specific about the moon, about guidance for sighting, any of those topics. And also, as Imad said earlier, I think, and Tom as well, please do let us know what you think, your feedback, anything like this, something we'd like to do again in the future.
Absolutely.
And maybe, Imad, it might be a nice thing to mention that sort of the program we've been running so far. So for a few months, we've had a few gaps here and there, but for a few months we've been running a program here at the Royal Observatory Greenwich called Astronomy in Islam. And we run it in our planetarium on as the Saturday before the predicted sighting of the new crescent moon for that month. And in that planetarium show, we use the digital power of the planetarium to show you where to look out for the new crescent moon in the sky. But also we have a few different versions of the show. Just last Saturday, we ran one particularly for families, for younger family members, talking about the stories of the stars, some of the famous Arabic names for various stars that we astronomers across the world still use today in astronomical research. Also, I've got some helicopters here as well, so this will buzz by. I'll let it buzz by before I continue. That's actually a
Chinook, yeah. They're very loud.
Very, very loud.
Two rotors, very loud.
But the next Astronomy in Islam show won't be for June, because we understand everyone is fasting. It is an early show in the morning, 10 a.m., so we wouldn't ask anyone to come for that. But in July, we'll start that again, the Saturday before the sighting of the new crescent moon. We'll be doing that every month for the next.
I have to say, I've been to these shows. They're phenomenal. You must go. Stop what you're doing. Go to the website. Search Islam and Astronomy. Buy some tickets. I don't think there's any for sale right now.
Not right now. If you just stay tuned to our website and have a look for Astronomy in Islam later on in the month of June, have a look out for it then.
Brilliant. Or June or July?
For July, but
okay.
if you keep an eye on the website throughout the month of June, and then that will be for our July show.
I also just wanted to mention something, because you were talking, Tom, about how calendars often have to adjust. So we have a leap year.
Right,
Yes,
yeah.
And Actually, the Islamic calendar is also inherited before Islam. It was an Arabic calendar, and they used to have trouble with it because it's a lunar calendar, so it's around 355 days, and of course the solar calendar is 365 days. So every year, the calendar would move 10 days or so vis-a-vis the solar calendar, and this is quite troublesome if you're in terms of seasons, crops. So every 3 years, the Arabs used to put in a 13th month.
Yeah. That's an easy fix.
Yeah, to recalibrate it into the solar year. And actually, it was the Prophet Muhammad, he banned that practice. He said, no, it's a 12-month calendar, it's a lunar calendar. And so, historically, my background's in Islamic history. Different civilizations and countries have looked at this issue differently. So, the Persians, they had a solar calendar that was based originally on the Islamic calendar to help them with their tax collection. I'm originally from Bangladesh, and we used to use a lunar calendar, and it was the Emperor Akbar. He stopped that. He changed it into a solar calendar. So often in Islamic countries, you can have an Islamic calendar and a solar calendar, maybe a Gregorian calendar or a Persian calendar or a Bengali calendar running alongside it. So lunar calendar is a bit difficult for things like tax collection when you've got harvest coming, things like this.
Tricky.
So
very tricky.
And it's such a common misconception for visitors who come to see us at the observatory. Understanding the moon is, even just in the public sphere, there's so much misinformation. Most people believe the moon's orbit is 28 days, don't they? Or the cycle of the moon is 28 days.
Yeah.
But if we're being quite precise, the orbit is 27.3 days. But that's how we measure the orbit with respect to the stars. Once we take into account the motion of the Earth around the Sun, we need to figure out how often the moon and Sun and Earth sort of create a straight line, which is 29.5 days. But it's actually sort of 29.55 days.
Wow.
So in the Islamic
It's very
tradition,
specific.
we have calendar length, month lengths, which are 29 or 30 days. That would be great if the moon just hit that 29.5, because then it would all average out. But because it's 29.55, there still has to be that period of drift, doesn't there?
Yeah.
So we're always at a challenge to adjust our calendars. And here at the observatory, one of the things that we're always talking about are the additions of leap seconds, and of course then the leap year, which of course many people are familiar with. By the way, if you're born on the 29th of February, please do leave a comment and tell us when you celebrate your birthday, because I've always wanted to ask someone that. Always wanted to ask.
Is it? It's a great one to lie about your age, I think, if you're following that particular calendar.
we've got a question, Brendan. I'm going to show you it here. Can we
great.
do a sighting for Eid?
It's actually, it could be quite tricky, that one. Not too sure about that one. That one's definitely one we're going to have a look at. It could be a lot less clear-cut
Okay.
as this one.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, what I might say though, there's a great program of events, the Islam and Astronomy events, and we're hoping maybe in the future there might be more opportunities to do moon sightings like this for future Ramadans and Eid. So please stay in touch, please stay in contact with the observatory, and hopefully more and more opportunities will arise. Certainly if there's a lot of demand, I'm sure Brendan and Tom will be happy to oblige.
Absolutely.
We're coming.
Any excuse to do a bit of astronomy.
Yeah, because
Right.
honestly, we
We're here.
spend a lot of time creating workshops,
We
delivering
do,
workshops
yeah.
at planetarium shows. Spending time underground to get out under the sky
That's
like
right.
this is
That's
a
right.
nice
Nothing beats
opportunity.
being at the telescope. It's the best
Yeah.
part of the job.
Incredible. I think we're coming to the end of our program. We've seen the moon. I'm so grateful to have seen the moon for the first time in my life for Ramadan. So it's really been a special occasion for me. Ramadan Mubarak to everybody at home. You're going to be fasting. Please make sure you drink lots of water. They're very long days. Any final remarks from yourself?
Just to say to everyone again, if you've managed to capture anywhere across the country your images, your shots of the new crescent moon, please do send them to us on our Twitter account. It's ROG Astronomers. And definitely, if you've got any follow-up questions after the stream finishes, please post to our Facebook page or to our Twitter account, and we'd be happy to answer them. And hopefully we'll see you here sometime at the Royal Observatory, Greenwich.
Thank you so much, Brendan. Any final words, Tom?
Just keep watching the moon, please.
Fantastic.
We love it.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, man.
Goodbye, guys.
Thank you.